Fall of Rome, May 9th through 11th, just outside of Stockholm. We have a venue that's up to 50, 60 people. We've sold our priority tickets, and now we're doing a sale for the general public where you can apply to join. It's not a pay-to-play experience, so you do have to apply, and we do have to approve of you being a member. There will be workshops to get you into the experience. We'll have improv workshops. We'll work with power dynamics. We will have everyone going around and helping to prepare the space as an act of just getting into the mode. We'll have a film crew there. So this is also a multimedia experience. We're trying to play around with a multimedia dimensional kind of quality, so the documenting or the experiencing of the event is a part of the whole concept rather than like the camera being a background figure. So there'll be a photographer there. You can get a professional portrait done of yourself in a costume or in a dynamic with someone. And we're inviting people to bring concepts to that. You'll have an opportunity to create a portrait in relationship to a professional photographer. We also have the camera moving around. So if you have a scene or a concept that you want to explore there, that's also something that's available for you. We have ceremonial elements. So we'll also be in the process of co-creating the open and closing ceremony in the days and the weeks before the event. So if that's something that interests you, then please get involved as soon as possible so that you can be part of that co-creation. We will have music. We'll have ritual artists, ritual musicians there. We'll have lots of opportunity for everyone to get involved in creating a sonic environment. That's something, I'm a singer, so and Owen is also a musician, so it's very important to us. There will be food. We will have a banquet. So there's lots of different activities and events. And weather permitting, which means basically everything from sunny to like drizzle, will be outside for most of the event in a beautiful garden. And we'll have afternoon games where we'll be playing around and doing all sorts of acts outside in the beautiful weather. All of this is outlined in explicit detail on the website, www.darkren.network, for anyone who wants to check out the details. And we will be, so another just note on tickets, there are limited sleepover spots. So if you actually want to be here for the full experience, meaning you want to arrive on Friday, you want to bond with the production team, you want to be part of going through the space and, you know, making sure everything is set up for the performance on Saturday, then get your ticket as soon as possible because those spots are already almost gone. So that's an important thing to note. And then otherwise, we're going to have like day passes, so for people who can just come for the day on Saturday and experience the performance, but not stay overnight. And I guess one final note is you're not expected to be inside of this high intensity, satirical, theatrical environment the whole day, or that it's some amorphous blob where you're not sure when you're on or when you're off. It's a very clear beginning and a very clear end. We're going to start around noon. We'll have about 2 hours of practice to get us into an improvisational and embodied state. Then we will begin the performances with an opening ceremony, so it's very clear that we're going into this world. Then we'll have open play, improvisation. Then we will have a closing ceremony in the night, and then we go into the after party. So that is the basic kind of composition of the day. So it will be contained. We will have lots of opportunities for going deep into the theatrical environment and also being more distant and observing of it or going out of it completely. Have I missed anything?
Preliminary Zoom sessions. So when you enroll, you're able to join weekly sessions where we do like practices and exercises and experiments for you to explore and also to learn basic principles of improvisation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those are happening Wednesday from 9 to 10, 10:30 CET. And if we have enough demand, we will come up with another time if people need that. And the women's group will also be meeting starting in April. So we'll be beginning our co-creative conspiracies in April as well. So yeah, there's quite a lot. There's a lot to do, and you can be as interactive and participatory as you want. You can also just come and be served. So there's a wide range of ways to get involved and be a really essential part of making this. We would love to have your application if you're interested, and we'll get back to you about whether or not we have space.
Mag toch
La, da,
als
da,
ik
da, 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 da.
zoek
I
naar...
just electrocuted myself.
What?
Good, that's a good start.
Christ. So, guys, how often do you think about Rome?
Oh man. Like I'm looking at a window that has like an arch in it, which
Yeah.
reminds me of Roman churches.
Uh-huh.
That's one thing. Like it's always in the background. There's a road there. Well, Romans built a lot of roads. Roads.
It's true. What about you, Owen? How often do you think about Rome?
Oh my God, every day. I mean, I studied Latin from high school right the way up through to university, right? So I was actually thinking about Rome every day.
Wow.
Thinking about Rome, but actually reading Roman literature.
Wow, okay. What do you remember? Do you remember anything in Latin?
In novo fert animus mutatus dicere formas corpora, which is the first line of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is the fucking best poem ever.
Wow.
But she got it here. So Ovid was the playboy poet of the late Augustan era, you could say. So the generation after Virgil, who writes the heroic manly epic of Rome. Virgil tries to be basically Rome's Homer. So to write in the way that the Greeks have their origin story from the Iliad and the Odyssey, Virgil writes the Aeneid about Aeneas, who flees from the collapse of Troy, goes sailing around the Mediterranean, and then eventually comes and founds Rome. So he writes the heroic poem for Rome's founding. At the time, interestingly, that Rome transitioned from being a republic to being an empire. So in the backdrop of all the civil wars and then Caesar coming to power, Caesar being murdered, and then the next civil war, and then eventually Augustus rising. Ovid comes about the next generation, and he is initially an erotic elegiac poet, and he's writing basically these much more camp satirical poems about where to pick up women and how to flirt with them. There's a very famous one about basically the chariot races are the best place to take a woman, especially because when it gets really crowded, you can just press up against her and grope her and nobody's going to know. And then there's instructions about bending down to do your shoelaces and looking up her skirts. It's brilliant.
It's not going to work today.
No, well, it didn't work for him. So Augustus,
He was a theorist.
Augustus decided that the Romans had become too corrupt and put in
Okay.
the strict moral reforms, and basically ended up kicking Ovid out of Rome and banishing him to some fucking town on the eastern reaches of the empire, where he finished his magnum opus, the Metamorphoses, and then lived out the rest of his life in a miserable exile. His final collection of poems was called the Tristia, which means sadnesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another fall from grace.
Yeah. So that's a warning to any would-be perverts.
Yeah.
Watch out in this era of conservative backlash.
Exactly.
We were browsing Rome memes yesterday, right? And we talked about how Rome is like this phallic fantasy of like the ultimate big empire thing. Like there are multiple, of course, but Rome is like for the West, I think, a very present one. And it fell, and it's an analogy to our times, right? It's something that tickled this concept into being, right? So I joined you after you came up with the concept. So maybe say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'll just say I think about Rome every day.
I knew
I
you had a
come home every day because, like, we are planning a immersive theater performance that's a reimagining or a conjuring of the Roman spirit. And that's forcing me to really contemplate the connection between Rome, the spirit of Rome, the story of Rome, and the reality of the history, and how how it's relevant to the world that we're living in. And it's been really fun, actually. So I get why guys are thinking about it a lot, to be honest. I think the women are missing out. You should spend more time thinking about Rome. Um, yeah, but I mean, how did it go, Owen? In the beginning, we were conceiving of this dark Renaissance birthday bash for the two of us, and we wanted it to be big. We're both turning 30 this year, and our birthdays are very close to one another. And, since we met in that fateful philosophy conference, we just had this creative spark around creating theater. And we've just been doing it. Like, it took us a year to start planning our first event, and then we got that going, and that was just over a year ago, March 1st last year. We did our first Dark Renaissance event. And since then, we've been keeping the fire going and becoming increasingly ambitious with our projects. And this is like, okay, we're gonna fucking go for it. Like, let's see what we can really do.
Yeah, I think this is we've done several events, and actually shout out to Philip Lundstrom and David Hugberg for the work they put into the first one in particular over in Gothenburg. I think this is the one where we've really been working for months and months and months on the concept and the structure. And as you said, we were thinking, let's do this birthday party. And this was late last year, I think, in the context of Trump coming into power. I think it was after the election that you and I were WhatsApping back and forth. And we landed on this topic of something Rome, something about the fall of Rome, because that image of the fall of Rome, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, that as much as thinking about Rome and its glory days, there's also this long arc of hundreds of years of decadence that everybody knows it happens, although nobody really knows what happened. Everybody knows that you had the civil wars, and then you had Augustus, and then there's 300 years where a bunch of stuff happened, and then it collapses, and the Christians happened, and then it all falls apart, right? But it's this open, empty canvas for the imagination. But what we do know is it was this power center, immense military force, immense population, actually pretty sophisticated technology wise. I mean, their literature was fantastic. They had philosophy academies. In a sense, okay, they didn't have smartphones and electricity, but they had, other than that, a lot of what we have today. And it slowly, it slowly came undone. And one of the interesting things for us in imagining how to create an immersive theatre event and create tensions and groups was also these conflicts between the Romans and the Goths, or the Northern European tribes who began to invade and slowly collapsed the empire. And there's so much there that I think we can make resonate with the experience today of the West being, whether you want to call it invaded or just people coming in from other areas of the world. The migration figures are higher than they've ever been before, and it's becoming a mainstream political issue. People have been trying to sideline it as far right dog whistling for ages, but now it's, in the UK at least, immigration is a mainstream conversation. In the US, they've started deporting people. So this idea of the boundaries of what is our civilization and why are they so permeated and who is coming in and what is going on there, that's in the background. And so for all of these reasons, we went this idea of doing a party, an event, a theater performance around the fall of Rome seemed particularly apt.
Exactly. Exactly. Actually, I just found the text it was from you, because I was at a party and I started sending you voice notes because I was getting all of these ideas. And then you started sending me outfits. You sent me a picture of Michael Jackson wearing a military suit. And then you were like, I'm getting this vision. It's 300 AD, Rome is collapsing, the legions and their Goth allies are throwing a mega party. And that was the initial frame. And then since then, we've basically just been filling that out, figuring out how we're actually going to spontaneously bring about this collective expression. We're not trying to force this from a top-down point of view, but rather seed a shared imaginary so that when people come into the event, that there's this very catalyzing kind of eruption of storylines and, you know, maybe repressed psychological material, archetypes, and dynamics that emerge that haven't been preordained. And that's been really, really fun. And I think Timon, obviously, you've been playing a really big role in that because of your role as the improv facilitator.
Yeah, and perhaps just to concretely say that the event is from the 9th of May to the 11th, 2025 by Stockholm. And yeah, basically we're just gonna bring people together. We're doing preliminary Zoom calls with everyone who applies, weekly calls where we like practice improv things and sort of prime you to be more prepared for an event where improv is a possibility. So the idea for me, how I got to this work is I've always been an artist. I come from the visual arts. Then I went more and more into improv, first through dance improv, and then more and more theater improv. And then I landed on puppetry in the past years, especially during the COVID era time where I was like, I made that shift. I just had one kid. Now I have two. And I was like in this bubble, like, okay, what do I do? What do I experiment with? I was experimenting with puppetry. And through puppetry, it's a very easy doorway to get into different sub-personalities or roles or voices of the self. And I knew this work from like personal growth and spiritual work, where you like speak the inner voices of yourself. And basically acting is also a way of speaking from inner voices of yourself. So I started seeing this, sensing this overlap between the arts and, let's call it, human growth work or therapy even, although I'm not a therapist. Disclaimer, we're not therapists. So then I became more and more interested in what would it be like to bring people together into a space like you would for a show, but it's not just a show, it's not just a spectacle, it's something you go into yourself. And what is necessary for people to then have a fulfilling experience, like put on a mask, put on a costume, play a role. How do you do that with people? How do you embody a role so you can improvise from it, which are like all very challenging things, but very fulfilling, especially if you don't take into account that there has to be an audience, especially if it's like for a group, that inside that group an experience of improvisation and going into a role can be very meaningful. And that can be enough for a group. Like when I go to a personal growth workshop, I don't care what it would look like to an audience, but it's meaningful to me and to the group. A possibility for the future would be, how do you do improvised work with people? That's also interesting for an audience, but that's a whole nother level of challenge. And in this event, we want to sort of like touch on that, because you've invited a film crew, Raven, to see if they can catch moments that happen that we might process into a film, but we're still thinking about the concept for that. So there can be some like an element of spectacle, and of course when you improvise there is an element of spectacle because the audience, the people that are also present, give energy to the performers. So in this event, it's more like you come with a costume, you come with an idea of a character or an archetype or something you wanna embody there. We're gonna help you do that in a physical way and find something that fits with you. And there's part of the event is going to be ceremonial. Part of the event is just you milling around like a party, like a ball, and where like improvised moments can happen between the players, but you're free to go in and out of that. So there's this, we're aiming to create this fluid space where you're in character, but you don't have to be intensely into performing, because it's virtually impossible to do that all the time. So create this space where you're free to cathartically go into these parts, into these body-mind postures, I call them, of a mode of being that you just want to experiment and play with, and then meet up with others that are also doing that. And then it's very easy to leap to this conclusion of, oh, it's going to be a LARP. But it's not going to be like that. And we're not going to be historically correct at all. This is all food for dreaming. So you're going through this space and you're free to go into these dreamlike scenes that don't have to make sense. You know, it's like we're referencing David Lynch a lot in our conversations, where there's like this vibe and this playfulness with things, but it doesn't have to make sense other than the elements are playing with each other and people are responding to each other and discovering something, and having like through that can be quite intense and also transcendent experiences. So it's not a LARP with a coherent story throughout the entire thing. It's also not, oh, I lost my thought there.
I can jump in because
Yeah.
you've been thinking so much about form with this event, and you've brought up the live action role play. That's a type of immersive experience, but there's other forms of immersive experience, and we're really more on the level of immersive theater. But you could also say that we're kind of trying to invoke a bit of a new genre within that category, which is an immersive improv theater. An immersive theater experience, if you go to London or if you go to New York, there are professional actors who have rehearsed a elaborate plot that's set inside of a building that the audience comes and is inside of, and they move through the set. So it's basically like moving into a film set, but there's no background. All of the little pieces of the production need to be hidden. All the speakers for the music, all the microphones, everything is sealed so that when the audience members actually come, the participants come, they step into a world that seems to be like an ordinary reality, except for set in an alternative world. But the way that immersive plays and theater work is like, because you have to rehearse and you have to have a story, there's limitations for how many directions the plot can actually go. So there may be some degree of audience participation in the capacity to change the story, but usually it's maybe 3 different timelines, or there's a little bit of interaction that gives you the illusion like you're changing the story, but you're not actually changing the story. So the participant is really just getting the effect of immersiveness and participation inside of a world that's already been orchestrated. And then you have LARP experiences, which go all the way over into the other side of like hyper participatory and intersubjective, where people really go into characters, they develop a whole character profile, they have a whole story. Sometimes you get like a whole briefing on your character that's pages and pages long. And you come and everyone is inside of the story. There's no audience. So it's all intersubjective. And those things can get extremely detail oriented, like down to people are wearing historical costumes that are from the period that they're reenacting.
Yeah, and entire wikis and currencies and things you can do outside of the game meetings to get currency in the game. And
it's like
that's
the autism is just like
It's sort of beside the point, because
overflowing.
the point to me is the practice of taking a perspective, and not just taking a perspective mentally, but really embodying it and having those experiences, and then taking those experiences into your life and integrating them. So it is still for me very much a personal growth practice. Basically, I feel more and more free in my life the more I do this work.
Totally.
And the thing I remember, the thing I was going to say, that this is also not just comedy improv. We want to have access to comedy. You can make like crazy weird shit and just be mad, and we also want to facilitate dramatic expressions of your character, even into the ceremonial and transcendent, because it's a very strong option and possibility that's sort of neglected, I think. I think, to me, acting is very much almost spiritual work. Like, I'm not a trained actor, right? But I feel like going into these different mode is really a way of like taking a step back from what your normal modes are and trying to shift all of that into a new reality that you imagine. So it's like it's sort of detaching from who you normally are and making that more fluid. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there, that comedy, drama, and transcendence spectrum
Yeah,
that we're
the
thinking about.
way I'm sometimes thinking about this, what we have with, say, the classical theatre, and I say that, I mean just really the theatre that isn't the cinema, where you've got stage and audience, you can create these elaborate narratives that can explore dramas of love, death, passion, politics, whatever it is. Shakespeare, Wagner, Chekhov, blah, 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 blah. Then we get the 20th century, we get cinema, which changes the form somewhat, but it's still very much there's an audience and then there's players on a stage. And that is incredibly, it's a window into human life, but necessity demands that basically most people are just there in the audience. What we've been seeing for, say, the last few decades is that alongside this, more of, you might say, the participatory culture or the ritual culture has been emerging, with people going to more workshop type things, personal growth spaces or BDSM spaces or LARP spaces or ritual spaces. The idea that you're no longer just a passive observer of something on a screen or a stage, but you are actively bringing something of yourself to whatever's happening, and thereby discovering something of yourself and potentially growing something of yourself. I think where I see our interest being is somehow bringing these together so that it keeps the you could say the transformative and the personal element of participatory culture, but isn't just oriented towards self and personal discovery and shadow work and some of this other stuff. I mean, that stuff's great, but also if you start to bring in bigger narratives, as we're doing with the Ball of Rome, you can start to think through politics, through racial conflict, sexual conflict, history, military dynamics, the dynamics of rebellion, revolution, as a group, as a social experience, and that enhances, I think, the types of understandings and the windows that we can shine into the world that we're living in. And of course, to go back to that thing I said earlier, that this idea of the collapse of Rome, this decadent empire, is so, I think, pregnant for where we're at today. And as Timon says, we're almost creating this dream canvas to paint on. And we're our job really as the directors and the facilitators is to create this space and to hold the frame of this space. But then within it, we will see what happens. And there will be some more, you could say, more carefully designed spectacles. And then there will be other moments that are more open. and we will just leave people and bodies to play out what wants to happen.
Yeah, and that's our main job, to design that space and to think of what prompts can we give, and what boundaries can we give, and what membranes can we set up, or whatever is necessary in order to make that a possibility, so that everyone is encouraged to really go into it, and also free to turn it into their own experience and look for their own spaces. We have a lot of different areas where people can go, and yeah, trying to establish different vibes and like imaginary spaces, like a temple space, a gladiator circus, and more. You know, like the sauna, the heated debate room. Yeah, and it's just a very exciting process for us. It's just a joy to work with you guys, I must say. It's very, very inspiring.
I would like to go more deeper into what you were saying, Owen. Can I just dive in?
Yeah, just go for it.
Okay, we're still recording, yeah. So, Owen, what you're bringing up here is, I think, the central thesis of Dark Renaissance, which is going beyond the personal development paradigm into the social development paradigm, which I think we're not, let's say, inventing this, but it's more of a response to the shift from the broadcast media era, the electric era, into the digital, where we're already locked into these intersubjective social fabrics, where memes and relations and conflicts are now the source of the content, the mimetic content that's constantly pushing into our inner experiences. That's what the quality of that is like. You're not in isolation having your own personal fantasy anymore. There are all of these intrusions into your experience and responses that move outward from your inner experience into the social world, into the social body. And I think in order to have genuinely cathartic artistic experiences, we have to shift from this kind of broadcast perspective, or from this idea that like you as the artist are just this like single person who's inside your fantasy, and then you're just presenting your fantasy to other people. There really has to be a fundamental change in the way that we're approaching the medium of experience. And immersive theater and immersive experiences were already kind of laying the groundwork for this. And I think a lot of that actually came from the gaming industry. The gaming industry being this interactive, immersive medium where you're going into and playing out a story and experience that has, in many games, a lot of open-ended possibilities. People were inspired to bring that into the real world. And what has emerged out of that is actually a big possibility space of new artistic experiences. But there's so many difficulties in creating these experiences. I remember when I had my first immersive experiences, I was so profoundly moved by how they completely took me out of my default mode and genuinely brought me into a story like that, which is incredibly impressive. Anyone who's run a retreat knows that you have to try and get people out of their default mode so they can jump into the live action of the retreat experience. But the fact that in a play you have like just a few moments, like you have 3 hours and you have to get everybody to just jump in, that's really hard work and requires a lot of sensory elements to really get people out of their habits. And I was like, okay, how the hell am I ever going to pull something like this off? This requires so much. It requires location, an immersive location, not just a stage in a room, but an environment that we can move around in that has lots of different places so that you can have different elements of the drama unfolding simultaneously, right? I need to have a crew, a group of people who are down to embody and instigate the narrative, and also have the skill to bring people in, people who don't know the narrative, the story, the participants. And we have to be able to pay for all this, have an audience. Like, all of these things are really challenging. So while this feels to me like the artistic medium of the digital era, it's also extraordinarily difficult to pull off. And so the fact that we're in this place together where we can do this, I'm in awe, and I am so grateful for. And that's what we're also trying to really put forth and honor in this event, I would say, is like almost this celebration of our capacity. And of course, that was also part of what Dark Renaissance was testing, and why we even started this in the first place. It's like, okay, well, we're all here. We have all these high ideas. Can we actually do anything? Can we actually make anything? Can we actually build anything?
Yeah, and embody some of what we theorize.
Embody.
Yeah, I'm curious also from you, Owen, to maybe say something about the mindset with which you approach it, because just to prime that, I always feel like recently you said something to me. I was writing stuff in the chat, and you were like, yeah, you're overthinking it. And I was like, yeah, that's basically the attitude I'm getting from you guys. You're just firing the cannon and just seeing where the ball lands, but you're firing the cannon. And I think that's to me, it's just so inspiring, because we're in this process now together. We're trying to converge our skills and our focus and our work to make this happen. But this attitude, yeah, perhaps you could say something to how you view doing these kinds of projects, knowing that it's very hard to pull off. But what makes it likely to you that it's going to be a success?
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is just the quality of people around us. I mean, it's,
The network.
yeah, I mean, so Raven and I first met, as she said, at this retreat a few years ago, and there was a sense immediately there, we need to fucking do something together. And we ended up, won't tell the full story, we ended up on this overnight bus from Paris to London, completely not where we were supposed to be. And I think that more or less cemented it. But then, you know, around that, I mean, there's just so many fantastic people that I've met from the last 4 or 5 years through doing podcasting and then the occasional 2 or 3 meetups a year from it. And to put it bluntly, just better, more talented, more intelligent people that I'm meeting in the real world. And actually, they do exist when we get together. And so, um, I guess I've always had this element in my own work, even from the time when I was 14. I just marched down to the guitar shop and said, I want a guitar teacher, of just getting up and getting after it. I'm not necessarily the cleanest or the tidiest or the most perfectionistic of creators, but I just want to go for it. And I think I have trust in the people around us. And so far, it hasn't gone wrong. And we've raised the stakes with everything that we've done. And certainly the Ball of Rome is a significant raising of the stakes. So we will see if we pull it off. It's bigger production, bigger budget, much more complex relationships and network with people. But fuck it, we have to try. Because I think part of that is also, I'm just quite bored by most of what's happening culturally. I think that, I mean, there's lots of there's great movies being made, there's great TV shows being made, there's great music being made. But, and here's my criticism and why I think Mark Fisher nailed something with his points about hauntology at the start of the 21st century, is that nothing really feels essential. It's like, okay, I know I could go and see AC/DC play and I have a great time, but it's not like I need to be at that AC/DC show. But it's also that if there's a group of 20-year-old punks doing a show in a warehouse, I go, okay, I'll have fun, I'll go. But there's also not this sense of vitality, not this sense of I need to be there. If anything, what remains of the 20th century to me already feels like say going to see a Wagner opera or going to see a Mozart quartet or something. It's nice, it'll be good, but it's not speaking to the reality of this moment. It's not tuning into what I think of this dual code of being relevant and revelatory. So it's not like super sharp on the edge, or it's not communicating something that is actually, if I'm not there, then I'm missing out. And certainly the ambition, whether or not we nail that or not, I don't know, but the ambition with Dark Renaissance Productions for me is to try to create these artworks that are actually completely contemporary, that are speaking to the best that we can to actually what is happening today, trying to use the mediums and the modes in a way that is most relevant, and that presents its challenges too. So for example, Raven was talking about these immersive theater collectives that exist and they're established, like Punch Drunk, for example. They have performers, they have budgets, they find spaces. It's fantastic what they do. We don't have any of that infrastructure. We're basically a bunch of internet punks who are hanging around, scraping by week to week, month to month. Raven and I, a couple of years ago, were sitting in my flat in London with no food to eat and no heating to put on because we were completely fucking broke. But it's just going, all right, that's why improv is an interesting methodology, because we go, okay, we can get together. We don't need to have 3 weeks together rehearsing and scripting. We don't need this to be a full-time thing. If we can, uh, if we can learn these modes, and we can hopefully onboard other people who also have other gigs, other jobs, other commitments, live in other locations. We don't have a center. I think, well, Stockholm, I suppose, is our center. Most of our people are there, but it's less than 50%. And the network continues to grow. I mean, Timon, you've been one of the people who showed up in the last year or so, I think, and it's been fantastic having you on board. In fact, I want to put it back to you and say, what was it? What attracted you to working with us?
I got into Alexander Bard's work, then I came across Parallax. I sent them an email, I think, or Bard, and just asked them, say like, hey, I'm interested in your work. Bard once said in a podcast, just email me if you're interested, and I'll connect you. I got connected to the men's movement here in Germany with Moksha movement. I got into their club, and they connected me with, I think, Tom Amark, and he connected me with you, Owen. I think that was the chain.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't what happened.
And
So maybe
Alexander Bard is just the first guy since, the first writer, philosopher since Ken Wilber that's blowing my world apart. That's like really turning my, it's like going from 2D to 3D and from 3D to 4D. That's the feeling I get when I started reading about libido and the phallic principle and all that stuff he's writing about, and digital libido is like blowing my mind, and hard books, and I'm going bit by bit, and I'm not really much of a philosophy reader, but even there, even just his podcast interviews have been so refreshing to me. And then also this feeling of dissatisfaction that I totally resonate with you on, Owen. I go to a performance and I'm like, well, the most glaringly obvious fact is I'm in a room full of people here, but we're only allowed to pay attention to the thing on stage. Like, what the fuck is this? Who are you fooling? Like, most of the energy is going into the human interactions and the smells and the subtle status games between people. And I'm very sensitive to that. Have always been. Like, I used to be super shy because I was constantly noticing all of that, and now I've become more of an adult, and I'm like, yeah, I can navigate it now, but it's still exhausting. But I want to play with that, and the stage can be part of it. Like, that's why I want to have a group of people, and the stage is there, but the stage is part of the thing. If you're in an audience, you're also part of the thing. You're there to be alive and not to be a passive consumer. So this whole broadcaster and broadcastee principle is just completely has become a tool instead of a standard. And that's, I think, what's gonna turn culture on its head, is that everyone is able to be an active node in the network and not just a receiver. And I think once you bring people together for an art experience, you have to honor that fact that everybody is part of that network and everybody can amplify things. And then I feel that that's the main work that we're doing, and we're just shaping this container and giving these prompts. Like it's about Rome. You can free associate. You can come with a costume. You're encouraged to find your costume. We're helping you to embody this, and it's all a way to bring those people in that space that we want to, the network that we want to amplify and make that more alive, and also see what comes from there. I really see this as, in the future, a way to also bring more and more skill into the groups that we bring together, and to actually see if we can make something in these group processes that we feel confident also presenting to the outside, or making, like, at least making the events visually and auditorily more and more attractive and artful and beautiful, and really trying to create workflows that enable like a collective production of really good art. And in the beginning, like when you're improvising, like a lot of stuff that happens in improvisation is not really fit for audience, and it's totally fine. But the experience to the maker is very meaningful. And I think that's the main thing to focus on right now, the experience for the participant, and making a great experience for a consumer it has become like less important, because everyone has Netflix. They can be a consumer. You can go do that. It's no problem. You can go do that. But at our event, you're not a consumer. It's not what interests me, to make stuff for people to consume, because I thought I was getting into puppetry, and I was like, well, live work is so much work, and I have 2 kids now, and I can't really travel much, so I'm gonna do video with my puppets. And now I'm like, Jesus, in a few months you can like speak a couple of prompts and press a button and you have a video. Yeah. So why would I make shit for screens? Like, even like, this is my first podcast appearance, so my ego is doing somersaults, but I'm in the back of my mind, I'm saying like, I don't care about making shit for screens. I'm tired of being at a screen. I'm doing all this work to make sure I'm spending more time with real humans working on awesome shit. I want to have that as like a studio with awesome people in the same location. But I don't have that now, so I'm really working hard on this to help this shit happen, because to me it's also the most vibrant thing that I've come across. Yeah, you just want to help it flourish.
Definitely. I would say, in response to that question that Hyman you gave, is like our leadership style. I think Owen and we're not neurotic people. And so we're able to both head towards these very like ambitious and almost like irrational goals without falling apart into a pile of neuroses. And I think that actually makes a huge difference for what we're doing. And it's also part of why we can handle the open-endedness of the project in and of itself. Like, if you're the kind of person who has a vision, clear vision, and you want to articulate that vision with extreme detail, then you want to become a film director. You want to become someone who has absolute control over the viewer, and over what is seen, and over the sequencing of how that is being told, right? And we're all Poglians here, right? Like, we know about the fascism of the camera, right? Like, that is something so deeply Apollinian in its nature that it's very difficult to do these fuzzy Dionysian projects in that medium. So the people who are more like that, they go to this. And for us, like, this is a perfect medium for a person like me, because I'm not so like super caught up in the details. I'm more like, okay, let's set up these parameters. And I think we've really gone into this idea of parametrics in the construction of this, and are developing our own theory for how to produce events like this. let's set up parameters and have some principles of interaction. Some that we're working with, for example, is the idea of the spectacle. So a spectacle is something where there's a certain saturation of attention on a singular moment or a few moments that are happening simultaneously. But that attentional landscape is actually at a point where multiple different centers are all gathered around the same type of interaction. So we think about spectacle as a way of drawing everyone into the same narrative in the same world. But that's one form. And then we also have the acts. So the acts are things that you carry with you. You carry your act with you. You can interact with other people who have an act. And that may be something that nobody else sees. That may just simply be an interaction that is intersubjective, doesn't have any voyeuristic or exhibitionistic elements. It's just participatory. Or you could have an act that does have a voyeuristic element. And this is another thing, like why we're not LARPing is like, we love this dimension of voyeurism and exhibitionism. We want there to be exhibitionists who instigate. And this is another principle that I really think is important here. The role of the instigator, the person who's like, okay, I see an opportunity to move into this environment and change the attentional landscape. Let's say everyone is dispersed in their dyads and they're all having their little internal experiences with one another. They're like this. And you're like, I don't want this to be the way anymore. I want everyone to look at me, or I want everyone to look at this thing. And so you go in and you actually change the intentional landscape from being a series of little pockets into a spectacle, let's say, something where there's a center of attention and everyone's gathered around that. Or there's a dilemma and everyone has to respond. So there's these different principles that we're trying to map out and then also kind of teach through the practices. Obviously, the improv sessions are really great for teaching these things, not in a theoretical way, but actually just through acting, just through doing, just through being guided and just through seeing what happens. And those types of open-ended experiences and being more interested in like the level of design and not so much on the content or like the storyline or like our story being the most important story. Like none of that stuff is relevant, or it's subordinate to the interest in how to design these types of experiences without having to have control over the ultimate outcomes. And we have a constitution for that, which allows for a lot of surface area for other people to plug in to our system and change the outcome and the orientation. And that's a fractal thing. Like that started from the get-go, right? Like Owen and I think have a very porous relationship as well, where our creative experience is like moving back and forth and is very like amplifying and very plastic. And then we bring in new time in, and then we bring in more people. And then suddenly like, yes, we're instigating something, but we're also really responsive to the new creativities that come into the system. And then that's part of the underlying theory for how we're even designing these things in the first place. And that element, Owen, that you brought up of this singularity to the event, like you have to be there, because if you're not there, then you're never going to be there, because it will only happen once. There's a pure kind of singularity to this, because the story can never be told again. Like, because there is no clear story that's being told. So even if we do the Ball of Rome again, we take the form and we reproduce it somewhere else, it will not be the same experience. And that singularity, I think, really does create this ritualistic and almost transcendent quality, where it really is the event. It is really a moment in time. And it does also mean that you want to take advantage of it. You step in there and you're like, this is going to happen this weekend. And then it's over. And I won't have this opportunity again. So I want to jump in. I want to go as far as I can. I want to see what can emerge out of this invitation. And that's another thing we're really trying to emphasize in the framing for people. Like, this is a singular moment. You're invited to come. The invitation, even touching you, is a kind of magical enchantment or synchronicity that we're even here and we're all connected to one another in the first place. Let's do some collective processing, because in at the end of the day, like, our thesis is that we need to get out of our heads and we need to get out of our individual cages into an embodied intersubjective environment in order to process all of the social relations, medic material that we're having just dumped into our experiences in order to have a collective catharsis. And that is our primary objective here. It's not to tell a specific story. It's not so that you get to have a personal transformation. It's so that we all have a social and embodied, co-created, relational transformational experience. That is the point. And that's what makes this ritual art and ceremonial art at its very basis.
Yeah, I think this point about the sacred element is really interesting to bring up. It's when the ancient Greeks did their theater, their tragedies, it was part of the city Dionysus festival. It was done in the devotion to a god. If you go back further, I mean, we can just imagine the first dramatic rituals, perhaps a shaman banging a drum and someone standing up in front of the tribe with a mask invoking some kind of animal or deistic spirit. There is this sense of invocation, of bringing the spirits that cannot be seen to be present at that moment in time. And we should note here that the theater has it has a tense relationship often with power. Very often, especially moralistic reformers in politics, they want to clamp down on the theater. Even Plato said that the theater should be banned because it fills people's heads with lies and delusions. It's not philosophic enough. It's not truthful enough. Um, until quite recently, in fact, it's one of the strange things about the 20th century that we look up to actors and Hollywood stars. In the 18th, 17th, 19th centuries, especially in aristocratic culture, if you were known to be hanging around with actors and actresses, it's as bad as hanging around with prostitutes. And there is something interesting in that actors, like the prostitutes, in a sense, see and do the things that are not supposed to be seen and not supposed to be done. But I was just reading in one of the CCRU, that's the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, texts the other day, who are a massive influence for us, as British collective from the late 90s. Um, an interesting criticism both of modernism in art, but also postmodernism in art. And basically, the argument is that what we see with what becomes this modern current is this attempt to become more and more representative and less, you could say, magical or incantatory. So what that means is trying to create artworks that show life and reflect life, but don't actually change it. If anything, it's like a freeze frame, which is very different, say, to the primordial shaman or the priest directors of ancient Greece, like specifically invoking a god form to infuse people's bodies and minds with that energy, so they go back into life with that energy inside of them. And then the same text I mentioned then talks about postmodern art. In a sense, we think of postmodern art as being, okay, hystericizing, criticizing the idea that art can represent reality. It's all just about the autonomy of the text as text and stop trying to link it to things in the world. But it's still based in this idea of art representing life as opposed to shifting life or altering life or changing life. And that's where the CCRU, based on their researches into Deleuze and others, were starting to think about a type of artwork for a cybernetic digital age, but that had the functions of these ancient spells and rituals that wouldn't just display reality or criticize reality, but influence and warp and shift reality. And this is, by the way, not necessarily in ways that are well understood by the people who are doing it or who are creating it. At best, it's channeling things that are felt via intuition, via vision, via dream, but bringing those in. And I think, especially at a time where there's there's a sense of lack of direction and also a staleness. I mentioned Mark Fisher's point about hauntology earlier. There's his point is that if you look at, say, music from 1979 versus music from 1985, in that 6 years gap, there's such a shift that the mid 80s and the late 70s have completely different sounds. Whereas where we're at, say, even say 10, 15 years ago, the difference in sound between 2005 and 2010, completely marginal. The difference in sound between 2025 and 2020, completely marginal. And you can get even more extreme with it, right? If you think 1970 to 1940, 1940, big band swing jazz was the thing. 1970, psychedelia has happened. But if you compare that, for example, 2025 with 1995, okay, yeah, everything's a bit more cleanly produced, but the beats are basically the same. The instruments are basically the same. The pop song structures are basically the same. The whatever inspires novelty in the arts is dried up. And I think the CCRU were trying to plug into something that could bring a new bit of voltage, a bit of intensity in. And I think that's also what we're trying to do with bringing in explicitly this more sacred transcendental element, as opposed to just trying to represent or criticize reality.
I love that idea of not representing reality anymore, or just art not has the goal of representing reality, but art is a factor in reality that changes reality. And like, I'm not surprised about the fact that theater is suppressed in totalitarian regimes, because theater is like one of the most powerful like virtual reality machines without using VR. Like, you can really imagine different realities, different from the dictatorship reality, which would open people's minds to other possibilities. So
Yeah.
that's a very important fact that I want to keep in mind always, that this is like any time you go into an improvisation space, it's like an explicit practice in creating opening a new door in a new dimension or a new plane of reality that you just can shape yourself and try things in. And that liberty is something you have to acquire through practice, because there's a lot of some technical steps you have to do in yourself to even open those little doors until stuff starts flowing. But I think it's just the most exciting way to go about art, is to really take the viewer or as a participant and see how, like, you can listen to music, or you can listen to a guided meditation, and a guided meditation takes your experience into account. Like, what is the merger of that? Like, with what the work you're doing with others, Owen, is also like, I listened to into the app. I had a test account for a while, and it's like, yeah, you're merging musical experience with a guided inner experience, which is like, I was like, wow, like, if I could afford this, I would I would get it and use it. Now I use like Sam Harris's Waking Up app, because I was grandfathered in because I supported it in the beginning. So I have a free account, and they have like constantly things on Zen, things on all strands of Buddhism, where you're just guided through experiences, and it's artfully presented. Yeah, and that's like most important strain of art I feel I want to do, although it's like really scary to do. They're like, you're putting yourself in that role of facilitating that. It's a big responsibility also, and it's like, it's very easy for me to get like imposter syndrome about like, wow, am I qualified to do this? Because we're working together, I feel supported in that process.
Qualified.
Huh?
None of us are qualified.
None of us are qualified, but who
No,
is? Like,
it's a double bind. We're not qualified, but neither is anyone else.
yeah,
Yeah, we're both like the least qualified and the most qualified.
yeah,
Like,
but I do think to defend that is, we're qualified in holding that space, like we've proven it, and we have people's trust. Yeah,
yes.
just to make that as a point. One other point I wanted to make is that the idea that I'm fascinated by, that has become crystal clear, is that human beings, we've evolved in environments and become really functional in environments, also as groups, as societies, with religions or spiritual work and dancing around campfires that made us successful as little tribes surviving. And that entire environment doesn't exist anymore. Like there's little bits of it, but like we're in our apartments, survival has been like done, check. Survival, not a problem. You know, you can sit on your couch and you have to fill in a form now and then and you're surviving. Like the state will support you. But all those needs for like enough movement, enough sunlight, just very basic, the right food, like something like many people are working on for themselves. But then out of that, like the social fabric that is totally disintegrated. My parents live two hours away. My wife's parents live 5 hours away. Um, like we don't have grandparents to take care of our kids. We have built this network in our neighborhood, and we're quite good at that. But the normal is like people are so dispersed and so integrated, and we're wondering why we're unhappy and neurotic and addicted. It's just like, yeah, rats in captivity that are kept separate and unable to play. They get addicted. If you put them all together and you're allowing them to play and fuck and eat and do whatever and swim, they don't get addicted. Like there's this research about that. So I'm really thinking of like, what is this? We've created this huge hole, and now religion has also disappeared. But all of those things like religion and spiritual practices and rituals, they all had this function to create and force the network, strengthen the network of people. And I'm thinking more and more about this work of like creating spaces. You can call them ritual spaces, ceremonial spaces, or just play spaces where people can come and the network of people that come gets strengthened. And that I hope when we build this into, I'm thinking more and more about this method or workflow that we're creating as like a game system that we can like spread out and decentralized have emerged all over the world. So it creates like these nodes where people can come into improvisational, symbolical, meaningful, artistic spaces where they're participating, and that hopefully bringing like a local effect on their own communities. Where they're like I'm imagining these carnivals coming from these like parades through the cities where people have these huge big structures of beings that have emerged from their own improvisational processes and imagery that they've designed in like group events and turning that, especially with the help of AI, you can accelerate those creation processes. And then just like from the seed of us coming together and trying this experiment, bring people together, turn that into like improvisation that is participatory and artful. And then from there, looking for how can we increase the value of this? How can we increase the quality of what's coming out of this? And encourage other people to also do the same experiments. I see a relationship to religion with that, like religious worldwide structures. Like if I think it like really far, like what could this become? And that in religion, in the sense of not a specific religion, but the function of religion of creating a meaningful layer to human society. So this art form that we're creating could ideally become a way for humans to amplify, to add, or to recreate that meaningful layer of art and ritual and community. Well, that's far away, and this is like dipping our toes in the water, I guess.
Yes, exactly. I would say something that we've missed in this conversation that I think we should at least touch on before we close is the element of comedy. So we're also really emphasizing satire, mockery, irony, lots of levels of irony in this invitation. I mean, we're calling it the Ball of Rome. Of course, it's meant to be a joke. We're building this in some ways on top of a meme, right? That's also a joke. right? So there's a lot of playing around with comedic elements. And I would say one of the biggest things in my life has actually been attempting to understand irony and satire, which I was not born doing. Like, I really didn't understand when people were being sarcastic or like how humor functioned. I was like one of the, like, really, I get it because being able to understand comedy, understand the function of a joke, be able to take things lightly, it is a very important social quality. And I do think that there are people who are suffering from a lack of literacy in this quality, and that this actually does have amplifying social effects that cause a lot of confusion and ill will between people. And I made it a mission to try and understand it and not be so fucking obtuse all the time. And it's completely changed my life. That now I get the joke, and I get the jokes on the jokes on the jokes and in the jokes and being the joke, and actually becoming someone who can be comedic, you know, intentionally rather than just incidentally by being a fool. It's a really important social quality. And so that's also something that we're trying to invite into the collective co-processing and relational dynamics between people at this event. Make a mockery, go into absurdity, go into the ridiculous, go into the satirical. That is a critical element. And of course, it's not necessarily the entirety of the experience. We've already talked about kind of the sacred and sincere intentions here, but having a venue, an arena for the expression of conflict that is satirized is one of the tools of alchemy, let's say, or of transformation that we're placing into this cauldron that we're creating. Do either one of you guys want to talk about the role of comedy here? If you haven't.
Oh, it's good. It's good. I mean, I think you nailed it really, Raven. I think you said everything fantastic. I think comedy is a liberating force, right? It um, shakes up things which are stuck, and it points to the dirt and says, "Look at that." And some people laugh, and some people go, "How dare you point to the dirt?" You know,
Not that dirt, please.
I'm working really hard to avoid pointing at that dirt. And I mean, we've just been through a decade where comedy has been intensely suppressed and seems to be breaking back through with guys like Shane Gillis, who is just a fucking unstoppable force, and he's absolutely hilarious. And I I think, I mean, we found when we did the Dark Renaissance retreat end of last year, which was our first conscious working with theatre with a much smaller team and scope than this one, it just became intensely funny. And there were moments, 1 in the morning, I'm standing with a bottle of whiskey in my hand with tears rolling down my face, screaming like, "They're taking the hobbits to Auschwitz." And I think, you know, one of the things we found is that we actually live in such a densely memed culture that there's so much material to play with if you're in the right context. That we were just doing these random Joe Rogan interviews with absurd people with
Oh yeah.
in and just coming with like, "Buy athletic greens. Guys, I'm a podcaster, and just like you need athletic greens. If you're a bro, you like the gym, you need your athletic greens. Only for podcasters. Try them now. Back to the
And we're in
show."
the background, like doing fitness. Like, the whole room was a stage and not a stage, and yeah, that just emerged from the work that we did previously, and then all hell broke loose. And also, like, I want to say that, um, like in the beginning, you also spoke, Owen, about like societal issues, immigration, all those tensions that I feel what's so great about this network, we can openly talk about them without having to take one of the sides. Like I always feel like I'm too dumb to understand the things that the political parties try to solve, because I'm like, if I just don't see the whole complexity of it. So how can I trust that any of you has a solution? I just want to be in a space where I feel like I can play with all of it. I can play someone who is an immigrant. I'm an immigrant in Germany. I come from Holland. Hello. I have some rights. So like I want to be able to just fucking joke about that. I don't give a shit about one or the other. I'm just curious about how can we open the space so that society becomes I'm able to talk to my neighbor, and even though I don't know where he comes from, and I don't have to be afraid that I misgender them or just like think they're from another country, and there's oh actually they're from the Ukraine, they're not Russian. Oops, like I'm afraid of saying all these kinds of things, but I want a society where we're able to play with that again, and to like joke about each other and ourselves and our national identities, and still honor them, and I get a sense of locality again. Like I live in a city here in Germany, and I'm like I don't really have a relationship to this other than the people I know, but I don't really care about the local place. Like that's sad actually. Yeah, so I want to instigate this more playful attitude in my own art of playing with identity, and take people along in that. So this whole seriousness and this not getting the joke and people being afraid to say something wrong, and this whole etiquette and this whole like I walk through the city and I go into a cafe, and I have conversations, and I'm like part of me is constantly walling off areas that I can discuss. But in this network and at those events and in that improv with taking the hobbits to Auschwitz and turning that into a whole thing, like just super incorrect jokes, but that's not out of malice. That's out of playfulness. Like a child who just sees that, and it's like, oh, what is that? What is that dirt? And let's play with it and like see what comes out. And also first and foremost of yourself. Like this whole idea of being an individual has been killed, and I love the idea of the individual from Bard and Soderquist. Like, let's explore that. Like, let's be multiple selves, and let's not repress any of that. And that's the art of acting, I think. Also, like just really exploring those different aspects and feeling more and more free in that. And I think that it requires a network of people like this to allow people to do that. Because doing it by yourself is like you have to be psychotic to really allow yourself to be so free in society. So you need a network for it.
Well, one of the points that Bard and Soderquist are making with this idea of individuals and network society, right? It's building on Deleuze and I think the relationalism. So the really interesting thing is not so much the fixed points as the relationships and the ongoing relationships between points. And it's been interesting recently. Bard and I have an ongoing conversation with Patrick Schumacher, who's one of the top architects in the world. You can see the previous video to go into that. That he is also developing Deleuzean philosophy into physical space, and or rather not space. So here's the point, is to say if architecture in the 20th century was about creating different spaces, we're interested in creating fields and zones of intensity. And so thinking about buildings less as room here, function A, function B, more creating open-ended environments where behavior A is more likely to happen in this region and behavior B is more likely to happen in this region. And then there's perhaps a crossover region where a bit of behavior A and a bit of behavior B might happen, but also spontaneous interactions might happen. And his argument, which I find quite convincing, is that this is necessary in architecture because the world we inhabit no longer falls neatly into functional zoning. Like, okay, you get up, you go to work, you're in the office from 9 to 5, and then you go home, and then you're back at home. Because we have these smartphones, certainly my workday, for example, looks much more like a sort of a gradually intensifying peak. Like I'll get up, check my phone, maybe send 1 or 2 messages, sit down, have a coffee, have some toast, get to work probably about 10, get into it about 11, maybe intense period till about 4 or 5, then come home, have a break, but then still be sending messages on the phone late into the night. And so it's not on off, it's more vroom, vroom. But then of course that just is dependent on the other intensities that other people are going through. And then of course once you start doing like where we're doing, where we all have several projects in several time zones and several countries, that becomes even more complicated because we're planning for different schedules, different zones. With us, it's more or less all right because it's just an hour time zone. But when we have the Americans on board, that we had a workshop yesterday, improv workshop, and one of the guys, it was early morning for us, and one of the guys had just come in from being in a bar late night. It's just these crazy feels, but of course that gets brought into the space, and so then we're working with that relation and that intensity. And I think that's with again with the type of theater that we're trying to create is a theater that can reflect that way that we're living.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I'm also an immigrant, so I get it.
Yeah.
I'm a refugee from Trumpganistan. I think like since we talked about comedy and I guess also like boy humor, I would say like one of the foreign languages that you have to kind of learn to even begin to comprehend the reality that we're in now. I also think we should touch a little bit on the role of the women in this, which I can go into. One of the things that I've been observed in most of my life is that I will walk into a room and there's mostly men and then me and maybe one other woman, and that's just like the normative thing because I've been very interested in philosophy for most of my adult life. And now that we're moving into the practice of creating theater experiences, it's been very interesting how we've shifted from being mostly dominantly male to having much more of this heterogeneous mix where there are women and there are men and there are the in-betweens, and there's a co-creation of the masculine and feminine polarity that creates a lot of very lively dynamics, right? Because that is core of life, is the chemistry of these two elements in a dynamic tension with one another. So the other motivating factor for this event is to create an environment where we actually play around with masculine and feminine polarity. We exaggerate it, we separate the men and the women, we let them have their own conspiracies, and then we actually open up the field of interaction between the masculine and the feminine from a position of separation to see what kind of stories emerge, what kind of dynamics emerge when we're having to deal with the other from a distance. And, you know, Esther Perel talks a lot about this, like there's this quality of attraction that's actually about distance, about seeing the other from a point of view where you are engaging with them as a whole, but also as a projection surface. And then as you move closer, they change. And that is the erotic process. So beforehand, the women are going to meet. We're going to engage in activities that kind of bring up stories and fantasies and motivations and kind of desire for play. What kind of play do we want to do, and how do we want to work with ourselves as women in this environment? That's actually a conscious element of what's happening. It's like, yes, we are women in this. We are objects of sexual and erotic fascination. We hold certain archetypal positions. We have a certain kind of power that we can bring into situations. And not only that, but we're inside of Rome. So what does that mean? Okay, so maybe you're a concubine, maybe you're a Roman wife, maybe you're a captive, maybe you're a dominatrix. Like there's all these characters and roles that you can inhabit that allow for the exaggeration of certain masculine and feminine polarities to be part of the fabric of the story. So that is something that for me is very exciting and is one of the primary materials that I like to work with, is the masculine and feminine. And that I think for us is the primary difference that we're working with. Of course, there's other layers that we're playing around with. We have the layers of the Goths and the Romans, which is a more superficial conflict that we're playing out in order to satirize certain principles. The Romans, order, civilization, technology, and the vulnerabilities that come along with being a very sophisticated and complex organization. And the Goths represent this wild, untamed, tribal nature, the barbarian nature that ends up often being the downfall of a complex organization, right? So we have this dichotomy, which is, of course, very potent and powerful and something we can all relate to. But at the core of it, the real substantial difference that we live in every day and really brushes up into the qualities of our lives is the difference between the masculine and the feminine. So that is one of the elements that's also going to be part of this. And I think it makes this, you know, it's not just a bunch of guys hanging out, cracking jokes. It's going to be much more nuanced and also subversive, because like I do think women enjoy the subversive and to play around with their power and to be invited to do that, and we don't actually have a lot of arenas where that's possible to do in such a theatrical and permissionary way.
Yeah, this touches on your approach to the pathical in events. But perhaps you guys could talk about that a bit, because that's what attracted me to your network, is that you're not afraid to deal with sexuality, with violence, with dark things, dark drives. Like, perhaps say something about your attitude towards that and how you think about integrating that in events.
We're dark renaissance, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, look, before I get to that, I just want to also add to what Raven said. Raven is working with the women on a whole separate conspiracy that we men don't know about. So, which is another of these ideas that we're putting into practice, working intentionally with conspiracies. So, even though, for example, Timon and I are core members of the team, we're not going to know everything that's happening, and that, of course, adds to the anticipation, to the drama, to the potential in this magnetic field that we're creating. As to Timon's question about the pathos, look, I think there's a lot of people in this network who are experienced in working with psychedelics or with tantric sexuality or with martial arts, with intense yogas, these serious disciplines that require you to take your body and or mind to extreme intensities, and intensities that are necessarily dangerous sometimes. That's the whole point of getting initiated into some of these spheres. And I think that's what we bring, is some of the skill and the experience and the literacy that has been built up for, again, decades by people around us, and which we've been fortunate enough to benefit from. And I think this is also what sets us apart from, you could perhaps say, the more LARP oriented world, which remains at the level of myths and playing together. We will be playing together, but we will be trying to give a voice to these intensities, and also trying to deal with the fact that sometimes it leads to conflict. The team members have fights sometimes, so inevitably this happens. But this is what theatre's about. This is what art's about. It's showing reality, and I think we go into that. It's as simple as that, really. If anything, it's difficult to talk about this. The whole point of these things is that they come in where speaking breaks down. It's rather just the raw intensity of living bodies and flesh.
And I would say something to anchor this on that I think makes it conceptually concrete is there's so much happening now that's people moving towards the sutra. People want rigid religious rules. They want to be told to fast. They want to be told to pray 5 times a day. They want to go back to the old religions. And it is a reaction to the cultural paradigm that we're moving into. It's very distressing to be moving into digital. It is. We can just say that our homeostasis is completely disrupted and our senses are completely accosted. And the kind of darkness that we're all being exposed to is challenging for any soul to have to engage with. Like, this was the stuff that only the tantric, priests would really have to deal with. The ones visiting the dead, the ones dealing with the mutilated and the lost souls of reality. And now everybody has to deal with the lost souls of reality. It is a difficult environment for all of us. And I would say for those of us who are on the path of embodiment, for example, who want to actually not be dissociated and not be disconnected, it's this challenge that you realize you're like, oh my God, as I become more embodied, I'm more sensitive, which means I have to figure out how to deal with all of this without shutting down. And it puts you into an interesting position, right? How to be with it without dissociating from it, how to maintain the embodiment and the openness without collapsing. And of course, I think we're all inspired, therefore, by Tantra. And even just as a principle. So something that's always resonated with me in terms of what Dark Renaissance is as a project, it's very much like the tantric practice of going to the charnel grounds. That's how I think of it. The monks, they go to the place where they burn all the dead bodies in India, in Varanasi, right? And they find the divine there. And we need that. We have to be committed to that level of spiritual strength by how much darkness we have to deal with, and how much paradox and conflict and tension that is just not going to be resolved. It's just ugly in its very nature, and will never be utopian, beautiful fantasy that people have, right? And I think, Timon, I so resonate with your mentality here, where for me, I just want to play with this. I just want to be with it. I want to witness and participate in it. I want to be in a social environment where we're engaging with this material on many levels, right? There's a sincere level of like grief, of joy, these qualities of belonging that I think we're so lucky to have in such a strange particular group of people, that we belong, that we care, all of these very fragile things, ultimately, really, as we're seeing. And then on top of that, the irony, the satire, the play, the memes, the jokes, the meta awareness, the distance. Like, you can't always be in the grief all the time in a way that's in and of itself indulgent, right? So there's all of these different layers that we're co-creating together, because yes, we are a product of the digital. We are inside of this relational environment. It's not even something that we're trying to design. It is just we're accepting our fate and being from this place, being from this position, thinking it, inhabiting, and creating. And that tantric quality of seeing it, seeing the darkness, being with the darkness, and finding that ensoulment is, I think, the basic spiritual practice that we're doing. And it does actually, at least for me, strengthen my soul. I think it does actually build a kind of spiritual capacity. And we're not doing a meditation street. We're doing
Yeah,
improv.
I mean, it's tantric work, creating a space for reality experiments. It's not trying to create safety, although we're setting up boundaries for safety, but it's not about creating a perfect, safe utopia for everyone. It's about strengthening ourselves and our network in order to play with and become active artists in this reality that has become so disjointed. So it's to me it's perpendicular to the cultural movement I've been seeing, where everything is about pointing to things that are unjust and amplifying them so that everyone can agree, yes, that's wrong. We have to protect everybody from that, and protect everybody from harm. And then what? Like, what are you doing? You're sitting in your room watching Netflix because you're so protected, and you're not free. I think the real freedom is becoming more and more flexible and less able to be harmed, because you're not that identified with yourself anyway, because you're an individual, now. You've been in all these roles, and you've worn all these masks, and you've played with all these archetypes, and you've played with your sexuality and with psychedelics, and you've seen that it's all just a joke. And I think that's just a beautiful counterpoint to current culture without opposing it. It's just like, no, this is just way more interesting. And maybe one day we'll land in the big theaters. I don't know. Or the churches. We could take over the churches because they're beautiful spaces and they're empty anyway.
Yeah.
And it's much more fitting to a group experience than a fucking theater. A dark room with chairs all pointing the same way. What? What is that? Why?
Different eras, right? Like we're living in a time where we are experiencing like a cartography of all the mediums of the past. And there are ones that were lost that are being retrieved. And that's also, that's the kind of hyper chronic quality of the digital as well, I would say. I mean, we could keep going on and on about how like it relates to digitality. I think like this is another one of our like theoretical interests, and maybe we can have another conversation that's more going into that specifically. But I mean, I guess practically speaking, if we're talking about the Ball of Rome and we're trying to give people something to relate to in terms of what we're doing, like there's a lot that's going on behind this. There's an interest in the history. There's playing with history. There's playing with retrieval. There's playing with the summoning of the ancient spirits, of the qualities of history, of the ideas that shape us, of the fact that our narratives are breaking down, our stories are breaking down, and then there's new ones that are emerging and competing for dominance. That Rome has been reimagined so many times. The Holy Roman Empire, okay? Like even the Goths have been reimagined and used to reframe historical periods. There was a period in England that did this very thing, that's actually where we associate the word Goth and Gothic, from that reimagining of the Goths within history and the relationship between the English, and they're deciding to identify with this group, right? So, history in us is, this is a whatever postmodern take, but there is a revising and narrative element to the way that we're engaging with history as a medium. And we are playing with that theater, that the theatricality of the story that we tell about ourselves and about our collective mission and experience, and creating a microcosm for all of these dynamics and relations and conflicts and qualities to be invited in, to be dynamic, to be responded to, and to potentially shape the outcome of our story, both within the little globe of our Ball of Rome theater, but also potentially beyond, which we have just the spell, the incantation. We can't tell you what the outcome will be. That's up to everyone who's participating.
Mhm. Yeah, one thing I feel like I wanna emphasize for a moment is that this still can feel quite theoretical if you haven't experienced improv, or like if this is all new to you. So I would just want to say that embodiment and working through the body is a very important aspect of the work we're doing. So like it's just as simple as just sitting up straight as you're listening to this, like straightening your spine, making yourself longer, widening your gaze, versus being contracted and curling up into a ball. Like both of these are like postures of your body mind, and you can expand that with like, okay, now I'm imagining I have horns on my head and I'm a satyr, and suddenly I have goat legs and I have a flute, and now I'm dancing around and I'm cavorting here, and I'm playing with everything. I'm playing with everyone. I'm challenging everyone, and that's a mode. Yes, Owen, the flute, and that's a mode to play with reality in a different way, and we access that through the body, through physical exercises. And my aim is to help people just go into their character through their body and find material to play with through your body, because doing all of this in theory, yes, it's happening a lot. It's super interesting to listen to all these podcasts and hear all these audiobooks and read all these books and everything. But when does it become something that's part of your life, and how can you experiment with that? And this work with voices of the self and archetypes and all that stuff is like, can also still feel quite heady. So I'm starting to think of this metaphor of the hand. So the hand would be your entire being, and your hand can take different postures, and they have different functions in the world. I can grab something, I can raise my thumb, I can raise two fingers, it can slap, it can prod, it can be a fist. All of these are postures of the being that have a function in reality. So your entire body mind can take postures vis-a-vis roles that have a function in reality. And the very functional ones that are sort of universal have become archetypes, and we recognize them. And it's a practice of taking these different inner and physical postures to get into these modes. So it's basically a yoga of mind-body flexibility, going into different roles and having different functions in imaginary situations. Yeah, I just wanted to say that because it can still be quite heady talking about this stuff. But I want you to really, like, when you go for a run around the block, you feel like a different being almost, because you're way more in that physical awareness, and you're suddenly a being that can run. And there's suddenly an association with whatever, a horse or a gazelle, that you can use to amplify that experience. And that whole richness of that animism, that was the core, I think the foundational religion is animism, of seeing spirit in everything and having everything have a sort of sacred effect on your consciousness. Seeing a gazelle run makes you more able to run, because you can sort of internalize that. I think that has been lost so much in our man-made environments that, yeah, we can now start consciously bringing that back and using artworks and puppets and masks and costumes in order to amplify aspects of yourself that you want to play with. But starting from your physical experience, because that's where eventually you're going to be knotted up and unhappy because your body is not getting what it needs, and it's not cuddled enough, and it's not running enough, and it's not eating the right things. And then from there, you look for material that you want to explore, and that you can take that as a grounding for what your character could be, or what mask you want to wear, or what costume you want to put on, what you want to explore. Yeah.
Maybe in the spirit of getting extremely concrete, I can just give a little pitch for the event and what it is. Yeah. So, Ball of Rome, May 9th through 11th, just outside of Stockholm. We have a venue that's up to 50, 60 people. We've sold our priority tickets, and now we're doing a sale for the general public where you can apply to join. It's not a pay-to-play experience, so you do have to apply, and we do have to approve of you being a member. There will be workshops to get you into the experience. We'll have improv workshops. We'll work with power dynamics. We will have everyone going around and helping to prepare the space as an act of just getting into the mode. We'll have a film crew there. So this is also a multimedia experience. We're trying to play around with a multimedia dimensional kind of quality, so that documenting or the experiencing of the event is a part of the whole concept, rather than like the camera being a background figure. So there'll be a photographer there. You can get a professional portrait done of yourself in a costume or in a dynamic with someone. We're inviting people to bring concepts to that. You'll have an opportunity to create a portrait in relationship to a professional photographer. We also have the camera moving around. So if you have a scene or a concept that you want to explore there, that's also something that's available for you. We have ceremonial elements. So we'll also be in the process of co-creating the open and closing ceremony in the days and the weeks before the event. So if that's something that interests you, then please get involved as soon as possible so that you can be part of that co-creation. We will have music. We'll have ritual artists, ritual musicians there. We'll have lots of opportunity for everyone to get involved in creating a sonic environment. That's something, I'm a singer, so and Owen is also a musician, so it's very important to us. There will be food. We will have a banquet. So there's lots of different activities and events. And weather permitting, which means basically everything from sunny to like drizzle, will be outside for most of the event in a beautiful garden. And we'll have afternoon games where we'll be playing around and doing all sorts of acts outside in the beautiful weather. All of this is outlined in explicit detail on the website, www.darkren.network, for anyone who wants to check out details. And we will be, so another just note on tickets, there are limited sleepover spots. So if you actually want to be here for the full experience, meaning you want to arrive on Friday, you want to bond with the production team, you want to be part of going through the space and, you know, making sure everything is set up for the performance on Saturday, then get your ticket as soon as possible, because those spots are already almost gone. So that's an important thing to note. And then otherwise, we're going to have like day passes, so for people who can just come for the day on Saturday and experience the performance, but not stay overnight. And I guess one final note is you're not expected to be inside of this high intensity, satirical, theatrical environment the whole day, or that it's some amorphous blob where you're not sure when you're on or when you're off. There's a very clear beginning and a very clear end. We're going to start around noon. We'll have about 2 hours of practice to get us into an improvisational embodied state. Then we will begin the performances with an opening ceremony, so it's very clear that we're going into this world. Then we'll have open play, improvisation. Then we will have a closing ceremony in the night, and then we go into the after party. So that is the basic kind of composition of the day. So it will be contained, and you will have lots of opportunities for going deep into the theatrical environment and also being more distant and observing of it, or going out of it completely. Have I missed anything?
Preliminary Zoom sessions. So when you enroll, you're able to join weekly sessions where we do like practices and exercises and experiments for you to explore and also to learn basic principles of improvisation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those are happening Wednesdays from 9 to 10:30 CET. And if we have enough demand, we will come up with another time if people need that. And the women's group will also be meeting starting in April. So we'll be beginning our co-creative conspiracies in April as well. So yeah, there's quite a lot. There's a lot to do, and you can be as interactive and participatory as you want. You can also just come and be served. So there's a wide range of ways to get involved and be a really essential part of making this possible. We would love to have your applications if you're interested, and we'll get back to you about whether or not we have space.
Yeah, everybody, just take a look at the site and just see if you're able to come and book your flight and book your ticket. Just, you won't regret it. There's going to be awkwardness, there's going to be fun, there's going to be disasters, there's going to be ecstasy, there's going to be all of that.
Yes. If we pull it off, yes.
And there's going to be ghosts.
Ghosts,
Ghosts.
emperors, barbarians, mythical creatures, music, dancing, food, people.
Good. I think that's a wrap, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.